Hi, here's a book for everybody who's ever lost a tooth or might lose a tooth. This is the story, Dear Tooth Fairy. It's a little bit long story, so make sure you've got a couple minutes. Written by Alan Durant and beautiful illustrations by Vanessa Caban. Oops, let me just get settled here. Oh, this is such a fun story. Holly's tooth was loose. It got looser and looser, and then it fell out. I could give it to the tooth fairy, she thought, and get a coin. But Holly loved her tooth, and she wanted to keep it. So she put some plastic vampire fangs under her pillow instead. The tooth fairy should be happy because she's getting lots of teeth in this whole set of vampire fangs. You able to see those little vampire fangs sitting right there? Holly was a very silly girl. Well, the next morning, the vampire fangs were still there, and there was a little tiny envelope. It says Holly on the front. Inside is a note, a little tiny note. You see that little note? And let's open it. There's writing inside. Are you ready? It says, while you were asleep, you received a visit from the tooth fairy. I was unable to take the tooth you left me because it was not a human tooth. It did not come from a child. It did not belong to you. It was made out of the wrong material. I will return tonight, tomorrow, next week, never. And the box that says tonight is checked. Signed, the Tooth Fairy. I would have never thought to leave the wrong teeth, but Holly was a little bit funny on that, wasn't she? Let's get to the next page here. Come on, book. It's never been sticky like that before. Holly read the Tooth Fairy's note over and over, and she was delighted. I'm going to write back to her, she said. She was delighted. Oh, here's what she wrote back. Dear Tooth Fairy, thank you for coming last night. I've never had a visit from the Tooth Fairy before. I have a few questions. Why do you want my tooth? How did you know it had to come out? Are there lots of tooth fairies, or are you the only one? Where do you live? Please answer, love, Holly. P.S. I drew a picture of you, and I hope you like it. Holly put the letter under her pillow. That night, the Tooth Fairy came back. Let's see what the Tooth Fairy says this time. When Holly looked under her pillow the next morning, her note was gone. In its place was a new envelope. It says Holly again. Let's open up and see what's inside, shall we? Oh my, there's a lot of stuff here. The note says, Dear Holly, questions. We tooth fairies are very, very busy, you know. Luckily, there are many of us. Each night we leave our home in fairyland and fly around the world collecting teeth. Human teeth are very useful for fairies. They are white, our favorite color. They are strong, and they last a long time. At the moment, we are using the teeth to build a palace for the fairy queen. I knew your tooth had fallen out because the tips of my wings tingled. They tingled a lot, which meant yours is a very good tooth. You must have taken good care of it. I look forward to seeing it tonight when I return. Please leave it under your pillow, the Tooth Fairy. P.S. Your drawing was very good, but there was too much green in it. And there was also this little note. Number 1, don't let your tooth go to waste. Give it to the Tooth Fairy. And the next one, don't throw that tooth away. Leave it under your pillow for the Tooth Fairy. We will pick it up. We pay cash. Oh my. You know what cash means. That means money. Just leave it like that and let's go on. All that day, Holly wondered what fairyland must be like, so she wrote another note to the Tooth Fairy. Dear Tooth Fairy, thank you so much for your letter. I'm glad you liked my picture, but please don't be angry. There's just one more thing I need to know. Well, two things actually. Are there different kinds of fairies? What do they do during the day and night? I know the fairies want my tooth, but I want to be sure they are going to be a good owner of my tooth. And that night, the fairy visited once more. Holly. Let's see what this says. Oh! Here's some pictures of different fairies. Meet the fairies. And then we have this little note here, and let's see what the fairy said. Dear Holly, I'll tell you what this fairy does all day and night. Waits around for you to give her your tooth. I really need your tooth for the Fairy Queen's palace, so I will answer your questions, but no more. This poster shows different kinds of fairies and what they do. Most fairies are very useful, except for boggarts, who are just a nuisance. Now, leave your tooth under your pillow. Think Holly will do it this time? Boy, I sure do hope so. Holly read the letter and studied her poster. She liked it very much, and she wanted to help the Tooth Fairy, but she didn't want to give up her tooth, so she had another idea. Dear Tooth Fairy, she wrote a letter. Thank you for the poster. It's beautiful. I think all the fairies are wonderful, but I like Tooth Fairies the best. Do you like riddles? I do. Here's a challenge for you. If you ask me a riddle that I can't answer, I'll give you my tooth. That's fair, isn't it? By the way, I know one of those boggarts you're talking about. It's my little brother. That night, the fourth time, the Tooth Fairy came, and here's the note. It says, Holly. See what the Tooth Fairy says this time. Dear Holly, how smart you are. I think you might make a good fairy. We fairies love riddles, and I've left you a little fairy tale riddle teller. Try it on your friends. Get them to choose a number, and you spell out the word. Then they choose another fairy, and you lift the flat and read out the riddle. Here is your challenge. Riddle me, Ron. Riddle me, Ree. Why is a tooth like a tree? The Fairy Queen's palace is finished, except for one thing, her throne. We need one more tooth to finish it. I hope it will be yours, but if I do not receive it tonight, I will not ask you again. If you really want to keep your tooth, I will not take it away again. Holly loved her fairy riddle teller. It was the best present she'd ever received. She knew that now was the time to give the Tooth Fairy a present too. That evening, Holly put her tooth under her pillow. Goodbye, Tooth, she said, and left the last note for the Tooth Fairy. Dear Tooth Fairy, the answer to your riddle is they both have roots, but don't worry. I'm giving my tooth anyway because I know how much you need it. I hope the Fairy Queen likes her new throne. Thank you very much for visiting me and being so patient. I hope to hear from you again sometime. Goodbye. Lots of love, Holly. That night, the Tooth Fairy came for the last time. She took Holly's tooth and left a letter and flew back to Fairyland. Let's see what that letter says, shall we? Oh, well, I guess they're not going to tell us. When she got there, she put the tooth in its place on the Fairy Queen's throne. See, it's right here, fitting on the throne. There's another. Bring in the fairy. Let's see. Here we go. The next morning, Holly read the letter and smiled at her new coin. She thought about the Tooth Fairy and hoped she would come again. In fact, it was time to start another letter to the Tooth Fairy because one of her teeth were coming loose. So here's her shiny coin right here. Wow, it's a special. Can you see that? That it's a Tooth Fairy coin? Maybe over here you can see it better in the light. Here's what the note says. Received with thanks, 1 tooth. The letter says, Dear Holly, thank you so much for your tooth. Just as I thought, it is a very good one and it will be put to good use. I hope you like the special fairy coin I left you. Your answer to the riddle was correct. You really would make a great fairy. I look forward to collecting more of your teeth in the future. But keep brushing your teeth, the Tooth Fairy. And that's the end of my story. I hope you enjoyed it. And when it's time that you lose a tooth, how about leaving it under your pillow and not putting the Tooth Fairy to that much work? All right, that's all for now. Love you. Bye-bye.